What happened? I think the fear of Iran by Israel and certain Arab countries, most Arab nations, motivated them to come together based on a concern of a common enemy, but also a desire to move forward. I think when President Trump withdrew from the Iran agreement, he sent a signal to the Arabs and the Israelis that he sees the Iranian regime as a threat to the region and world stability. And what formed this alliance, I think, is a historic opportunity for the Arabs and the Israelis to integrate their economies, to recognize each other's existence, so they can not only help their fellow citizens, individual citizens of their nation, but also to become a stronger bulwark against a common enemy in Iran. For this to go to the next level, just being something on paper, we're going to have tourism, trade, open up of embassies, economic integration. So that's yet to come. The Egypt-Israeli peace agreement never really matured in terms of cultural exchanges, economic integration, security cooperation the way we hoped. I'm hoping the Abraham Accords can take it to the next level. But I think it started, be honest with you, with a fear of Iran's behavior in the region, the threat that the parties have in common regarding Iran. But I hope it develops beyond something other than fear of a common enemy, that it becomes agreements that people see as a win-win for the region. If you told me a few years ago that we would have peace agreements between the UAE, Israel, Morocco, Sudan, and Bahrain, and maybe other nations, I didn't see that coming. The whole conventional wisdom was that you can't have really peace agreements between Israel and members of the Arab world until you solve the Palestinian question. Hats off to those who participated in the Abraham Accords and groundbreaking diplomacy here. I think you've done something that will, over time, change the region for the better. The United Arab Emirates has made a commitment to recognize Israel and try to integrate the economies, both of them very forward-leaning, high-tech economies. I think it's going to be a win-win situation. But it just shows you what happens when people will think outside the box. To all the Arab members of this panel, you've set the conditions for a better life for your people. You've made the region more stable over time. You've created opportunities to change past behavior in a positive way. And I can't thank you enough, but the hard work is still ahead of us, making these agreements a reality. But I was surprised. But now I am very all in to try to make the Abraham Accords grow and be more meaningful over time. Well, generally speaking, when you have economic relationships with people that are seen to be a win-win, you're less likely to go to war. You know, I can't think of a war between two democracies. So that's one concept that makes war more difficult. You have the rule of law to work out differences. But economic integration, when you really see a benefit to your economy from having a relationship with another country, changes the entire makeup of the foreign policy and the ability to engage each other. So for the Abraham Accords to go to the next level, to really begin to affect the lives of people on the ground, you're going to have to do free trade agreements. You're going to have economic ties, security cooperation, the full range of diplomatic relationships. But the key here is economic integration. I think this is a tremendous win-win for the entire region, because you have very talented people, forward-leaning technologies all over the Mideast, and having the Abraham Accords being a process to economically integrate is the key to this, making it or not over time. Well, I think people getting to know each other is just a tremendous benefit for peace and stability. We haven't really seen that with the Israeli-Egyptian peace agreement. Not a whole lot of cultural interchange, not a whole lot between Jordan and Israel. My hope is that the Abraham Accords will be different, that people will get on airplanes now that they can and go see cultures they would never really be able to see otherwise, to form business ties, to form personal relationships, to play sports, to have cultural exchanges. I mean, all the things we're talking about here have been absent in the Mideast. Now they're a reality. Let's build upon it. The way the Mideast changes is for the people in the Mideast to change. The best way for the people to change is to get to know each other, get to know one another, to do business with one another, to understand the culture where all boats rise. One thing about America that I like the most, we're a collaboration of many cultures. It's all about one out of the many. And the richness of America is that everybody from the world came here rallying around common ideas of free speech, democracy, picking your own leaders. Well, what I hope for the Mideast is that the governments can not only have diplomatic ties between each other, but the people can have meaningful relationships with each other. Today, that happens. That's truly the change that we've been all praying for. And change is going to come. And it has come through the Abraham Accords. And from the United States point of view, we should invest heavily in making sure that the Abraham Accords becomes a reality when it comes to trade, tourism, and cultural exchange. It is in the U.S. interest for the region to be more stable. And there's no better way to become more stable than to get to know each other and see benefit in coexistence. I think it probably shook the Iranians to their core. Nobody dreamed a few years ago that Arab countries would be able to form an alliance with Israel without first dealing with the Palestinian question. I still want to deal with the Palestinian question. I support a two-state solution, dignity for the Palestinian people, security for the state of Israel. Count me in for that idea. But I just think the Abraham Accords was a game changer. It has weakened Iran. It has strengthened the alliance between the Arab and Israeli governments and people. It's made the United States safer. We're all working together to integrate the region economically, culturally, and the Iranian people are going to see what can happen when your governments work together. I think the biggest threat to the Ayatollah is when the region begins to understand each other, when it becomes a win-win to travel, to have tourism, economic integration, and the Iranian people are going to be left behind because the regime wants to do the old way of doing business. Abraham Accords rejects the old model, and the regime in Iran depends on the old model of division and hatred. So I think the Abraham Accords is going to be a rallying cry for the Iranian people to change their government because they see the benefits of the Abraham Accords, and Iran becomes over time even more of an outlier than they are today.